Hey guys, welcome back to Nerd Crave. Today I want to talk about something that literally changed my life and turned me into who I am today. But before that, I'm going to make a coffee because I'm going to need it for this walk down memory lane. Stay tuned. Alright guys, I got my coffee. Everything's better with coffee. So today I want to talk about the PlayStation 1, the mighty PlayStation 1, and what it meant to me and what it has done to me to turn me into who I am today. The PlayStation 1 is responsible in large part for the fact that I identify as a nerd today. I'm almost 42 years old, so I had the benefit of being around in the 80s for the Atari 2600 and the Commodore 64. I played the NES, the Super NES. One of my first 16-bit consoles was actually the TurboGrafx 16, and I had a ton of fun with that. But as we moved into the middle 90s, I had kind of moved away from video gaming as any kind of regular activity. I had gotten into sports and girls and friends, and pretty much put video games down as child's play. Until, a couple of years after the PS1 launched, I started seeing advertisements for Final Fantasy VII. And let me tell you, Final Fantasy VII is the game that brought me back into gaming and turned me into a nerd. So it was the summer of 1997. My cousin, my young cousin, he's about 6 or 7 years younger than me, was living with me at the time. And the summer of 1997 goes down for me as the best gaming year of my entire life. And I'll tell you why. Final Fantasy VII, Rayman, Twisted Metal, these three games kept us busy for an entire summer. I eventually picked up quite a few more games, and I'm going to tell you about it, but first I want to talk a little bit about Final Fantasy VII and what it meant to me. The PlayStation 1 offered an opportunity that we had never seen before in previous generations. Because of the storage size on the disc, we were able to have access to games that had so much more content than games previously. Games on the PS1 were visual. They were 3D. They had cutscenes and story and dialogue and voice acting and so many things that were so immersive at the time and frankly mind-blowing. Final Fantasy VII, I was not even into JRPGs. I did not play JRPGs on 16-bit consoles previously. I had never played Secret of Mana, I had never played Chrono Trigger, I had never played any games like that. The closest thing that I had ever played was some Zelda games on the NES and Super NES, which are not JRPGs at all, but they have some aspects of that style of gameplay. But Final Fantasy VII blew my mind. It was absolutely visually stunning. But what really blew my mind is I had never played a game before in my entire life that you would have to invest 60, 70, 100 hours in order to experience the full story, the full scope of the game. I was used to platformers and adventure games like Mario, where you play a level and it's 2.5 minutes and you play 3 or 4 or 5 levels and maybe beat a world, and then you chuck the controllers and go eat a pizza. Well, Final Fantasy VII was the first game that I ever played where I had to keep coming back to the console day after day after day for weeks and weeks to beat the game. That was a completely new experience to me in 1997. And that sparked a lifelong love, not only for the Final Fantasy franchise, but for the PlayStation 1 and JRPGs in general. Coming on the heels of Final Fantasy VII in the spring of 1998 was what is now become my all-time favorite game on any console of all time, and that is Parasite Eve. Let me tell you something about Parasite Eve. I have yet, in 20 plus years, to find another game that comes close to matching how cool Parasite Eve was. Parasite Eve is a traditional JRPG in that it has leveling up mechanics and XP and magic points and things like that, and you upgrade your weapons and you have skills and abilities that you gain over time. So it's very much, it's turn-based, it's very much a JRPG, but what makes it so different is that it's happening in modern day in New York City, and it's kind of more of a science fiction sort of survival horror story, and it has kind of elements of kind of a Resident Evil sort of thing with the camera angles and stuff like that. It's kind of, a lot of people compare it to if Final Fantasy and Resident Evil had a baby, and that's pretty accurate actually. And I have yet to this day to find another JRPG that is set in modern day in a Western society, like a real location like New York City, that has that turn-based mechanic, but you're using things like guns and grenades and bombs and bazookas instead of swords and magic and arrows and things like that. That's an experience that I really would love to have again. And it just seems to be a concept that they did just kind of this one time, and that was it. Now, Parasite Eve did have a sequel, Parasite Eve 2, which was also on the PS1. I didn't like that one as much, mostly because I felt like the controls were wonky. They tried to do something a little bit different with the controls, and the whole thing just felt very stilted. The story was cool, but nothing beats the first game. There was actually a third game on the PSP called The Third Birthday, which I have not played because I don't actually have access to a PSP at the moment. It is a fairly cheap game to get your hands on. You can pick it up in most places for $15 or $20. So it is something that I do plan to get around to playing at some point. Being such a huge fan of the series, I even surprised myself that I haven't played it yet. So those were the two big JRPGs that I played early in my experience with the PS1. That sparked a 20-year obsession with JRPGs that followed through the PS2 and the PS3, getting into things like the Tales of series, later games in the Final Fantasy franchise, and so many others. But that's not all that there was about the PS1 that just had me and my cousin, we played together every day. So moving on away from JRPGs, one of the greatest games, and this is a franchise that I love to this day, although there hasn't been too much recently, is the Twisted Metal franchise. I picked up Twisted Metal 1 when I picked up my PS1. I think it was about $20 because it was a year or so old. I think it was a recycled copy. I had no expectations going into this game, but this ended up being a game that my cousin and I could pick up and play versus mode or competitive mode over and over and over again. We played this game for so many hours. It's a car combat game. You choose from a variety of cars and characters with different special abilities. They have rockets and bombs and things of that nature. It's a pretty standard car combat game, but we had not really seen anything to that depth in the way of a car combat game before. There were a few car combat games on the NES and Super NES, but nothing to the level of depth and the level of graphics that we were seeing in Twisted Metal 1, and carrying on into the rest of the series. The PS1 also had Twisted Metal 2 and 3, which were some of the greatest games on the PS1 and remembered by an entire generation of fans. The great thing about Twisted Metal is that there was several different modes to play in, so you could play competitively with a friend, or you could play cooperatively with a friend against the AI, or you could play single player, kind of a story mode where you'd go through character after character, almost like a fighting game. And the combat was a lot of fun. Yeah, the car controls were a little bit jaggy. They were a little funky to control, especially in the first couple of games. It did get better over time. There was so much character to these games. They were so edgy. They were so 1990s. Like, just the whole attitude, the grungy feel. It was just so 1990s. I mean, it would fit in perfectly well with your can of Mountain Dew and your copy of The Matrix and your copy of Twisted Metal, and that's a weekend right there. You've got your Doritos, your Mountain Dew, you've got The Matrix on DVD, and you've got a copy of Twisted Metal, and you and your friend are having a weekend sleepover. You play Twisted Metal all day, you break out the Doritos, you watch The Matrix. That's what the 90s was all about. Christmas of 1997, I got Gran Turismo, and let me tell you, I had never really played a racing simulation game up to that point, other than, a couple of things on the NES, but it's not the same. The experience of playing Gran Turismo on the PS1 in 1997 was absolutely mind-blowing. The depth of that game, the number of cars, the detail of the track, the way things controlled. The controls were absolutely just breathtaking. The sound effects of the cars seemed so realistic at the time, and the series has come a long way. Gran Turismo 6 is an absolute gem. Going back to Gran Turismo 1, even today, I can play GT1, GT2, GT3, GT4. I think 2, 4, and 6 are my favorites in the series, but Gran Turismo 1 was a life-changing experience, and my cousin and I played that game for hundreds of hours. We did the endurance races. We did absolutely everything in that game. We exploited every possible glitch in the game that we could find. We farmed for money, did races over and over again so that we could get every car and get it upgraded every way possible. The depth in that game, the car tuning, just unbelievable game. Some other games that really caught my attention early in my experience with the PS1 was Spyro the Dragon series, the first and second particularly. I never had the third back then, but the first and second Spyro the Dragon games, really groundbreaking for the time. The only thing you could really compare Spyro to would be something like a Mario 64 on the N64. Now, because the N64 had limited storage in the cartridges compared to the CD disc on the PlayStation 1, Spyro had the benefit of a lot more depth of context, a lot more depth of content, in that there was just more to do. The colors were more vibrant, the world was more expansive, there was more of a story. It was just engaging in every possible way. A very charming game. Some people would say it's a kid's game, but they're timeless classics. Some other games, Crash Bandicoot. I can't say enough about the creative level design of Crash Bandicoot, coming right off the heels of the 16-bit generation, where pretty much every platformer was left to right, scrolling, and that was just about it. Crash Bandicoot turned the entire platforming world on its head with its perspectives. In one level, you'd be going away from the camera. In another level, you'd be coming towards the camera. You'd be going left to right, right to left, up, down. You'd be flying an airplane, riding a wave racer on the water. So much creativity in the level design, and the platforming was genuinely difficult but good. Another game that I picked up early in my time with the PS1 was Ridge Racer R4. The opening cinematics in that game were enough to have me hooked. We had never seen anything so realistic in CGI as the opening cinematics for Ridge Racer R4, and I was hooked from the first 2 minutes that I put that disc in. Not to mention the stunning graphics of the tracks, the cars, the handling of the cars. It was one of the first experiences that I ever had with drift mechanics, which have become legendary in games like Need for Speed Underground at this point, and so many other games, even the Forza Horizon series and stuff like that. They all harken back to the original Ridge Racer games on the PlayStation 1. Of course, today, I do all my PlayStation 1 gaming on my PS2. I actually consider the PS2 to be the greatest console of all time, and one of the major reasons why I think that is because of PS1 backwards compatibility. But these days, all of my PS1 gaming is done on the PS2 because of that wonderful seamless backwards compatibility that's made the actual console for the PS1, other than as a collectible, it's basically completely redundant at this point. PS2s are incredibly cheap. When you take into account my fantastic modded PS2, which you're seeing here in the footage, the one in the clear, translucent shell, it's actually completely modded. It's got a modded shell. Inside, it's got a chip that unlocks it so that it can play Japanese, PAL, and North American games, as well as burn discs. So this console is really my go-to console for all PS1 and PS2 games because it literally plays everything. And then beside it here you can see another one of my PS2s, one that I actually mentioned in my previous video, which is a regular black PS2 Slim that my daughter modified by putting this cool Galaxy theme on it for me. She's been doing some console decorating for me. She's done a couple of them now. I actually have 4 PS2s. I have an Arctic white PS2 Slim. Now these are definitely a little more on the uncommon side. They're definitely a lot more expensive. An average PS2 Slim might cost you $20 or $30, whereas these go from $75 to $100 in good condition. And then I have, of course, the mighty PS2 Fat, which you just have to have in your collection at this point. I can't say enough about how much that time meant to me and what it did for me in terms of reigniting my love, not only for video games, but for so many themes, so many central themes that I've come to know and love, like science fiction and fantasy that were brought out by the JRPGs and the different storylines that I played. Games like Metal Gear Solid and Siphon Filter, and so many great memories with the PlayStation 1 in those first couple of years, leading into great memories with the PlayStation 2. I can't say enough about who I became. I am here today on this journey with you because of the time I spent with the PlayStation 1. And I can't thank Sony enough for breaking off the relationship with Nintendo and going out on their own, because they made a fantastic decision that to this day has led to some of the best-selling consoles of all time. And I can't give enough props to the mighty PlayStation 1. Alright guys, thanks for watching. Stay classy.